Hello, everyone. Welcome back to East Coast Haunts. I'm MK.
And I'm Sam.
I almost said I'm Sam, so
I
that
know
just
we're a little
shows
bit out
you
of practice.
that just shows you the kind of mood that tonight we're in. We both have our candles lit. We're both celebrating the start of spooky season. We're
The
2 days
official
in,
start.
exactly 2 days into October when we're recording this, and just another little shameless plug for our Patreon, but uh we are 10 days away from when we will be attending Halloween Horror Nights down in Orlando. So if you want the inside scoop on all the houses, the events, the food we're going to be eating,
Character
subscribe to
lore.
exactly. Subscribe to the Patreon. You're going to get it all. And you have access to a previous series where we watched and reviewed horror movies for you guys. So,
Lots of good stuff on there. Just saying.
exactly. And once Halloween Horror Nights is over, we're going to have to start a new series.
I know. And if
So,
you're a Patreon, you have a little bit of a say in what that new series will be. So now's the time
exactly.
to join, folks.
Exactly. Start now before we start that new series, and you could be the one to suggest whatever we cover.
What a prize, right? Just
Yes.
saying.
And
So, yes,
sorry, I was just going to say my little tagline is that it's less than a cup of coffee a month. So,
right. Much less.
and it keeps us rolling.
It keeps us
So,
going. Yeah.
without further ado though, Sam, you want to tell them what we're talking about today?
Yes. So I know you were just saying it's like the official start of spooky season.
Yeah.
So this week's haunt slash more so history. This is definitely more of a history episode than a haunt episode, which is funny because usually we do more haunted. But we are talking about Sleepy Hollow, New York, because yes, it is a real
Woo!
place. Um, so I guess I'm just gonna get started with it. You want to just get
Yeah,
into
may
it?
as well. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so for those of you who don't know, yes, Sleepy Hollow is a real place, and it's a very charming, picturesque village, located in Westchester County, New York, and it is along the eastern bank of the Hudson River.
I didn't know it was in Westchester County. That's like not super far.
Yeah, I'm not even gonna pretend that I know where any counties are in New York. If you could describe it to me.
I was like literally there for a wedding not
Oh, you
too long ago.
were.
Yeah, right in like in Westchester County. So it's not too far from my parents' house.
Okay, well, good to know. Maybe this is the type of place to take a weekend trip. Sort of like Jim Thorpe vibes a little bit.
Maybe, maybe we'll have to
Put a
investigate.
put a bookmark in that one. So, and it does seem like it's like a all year round attraction sort of place. Obviously more popular in the fall, which you'll find out why soon. But it's known for its rich history, especially its association with the famous American author Washington Irving. If you've never heard of him, he is sometimes known as America's founding father of literature. He was,
Wow.
yeah, he was considered to be by some, not by all, but what like the first nationally or internationally famous American author. So people from Europe were reading his books, people from I mean I know like back then like all like I feel like they only talked about Europe, but people from all over were reading his books, which is very impressive. Um and if you've never heard his name, you've probably heard of his stories. Two of his most popular are Rip Van Winkle, which is
Oh
about,
yeah.
if I recall, correct me if I'm wrong, a guy, he like falls asleep, and he wakes up like
Yeah.
100 years later, right?
Yeah, I had to read that for my high school English class. I forgot that that was Washington Irving.
So did I until I was researching this. And then, of course, the Legend of Sleepy Hollow is his most famous. If you've heard of the Headless Horseman, he originated that whole tale, which is really cool.
Um,
So I
oh,
want to tell you a little bit about Washington Irving before we get into the locations for today, because I think it's important to kind of have like he's so intertwined with the
yeah.
place. In fact, very interestingly, um, this place was actually not called Sleepy Hollow until 1996. Before 1996, it was called North Tarrytown. Um,
Interesting.
and it's crazy to me how it was not changed until very recently, like I was almost born. You and I were both almost born by the
Wow.
time they changed it. It's like that's kind of a big change to make, right?
How, yeah, to just change the name up and change the name of your town. I guess that's
Yeah.
kind of the process, right?
I think it probably really is. I think that it was just he had such an influence on the village, and it's their big claim to fame, and it's a pretty cool claim to fame. So they
That's actually
decided to
really
change it.
cute.
Yeah, so North Tarrytown, and now it's Sleepy Hollow, New York. So, um, Washington Irving, sorry. He was born in 1783. He died in 1859. As you can tell, he was a very prominent American author, essayist. He was a biographer, and he was actually also a diplomat, which is very interesting. He was an American diplomat.
Do you
So
know to what countries?
it was somewhere in Europe. I
Okay.
want to say it was like to multiple places in Europe. I could be wrong. I might have it in my notes somewhere that I might get to, so hold.
I had a diplomat in mine who also was like a diplomat to two European countries.
A diplomat in your what? Oh, in your
In my
research.
in one of my
Ooh,
locations.
interesting. Okay. Everything's starting to connect. So Irvine was, I don't know why I keep calling him Irvine. Irving was born in New York City. And he was the youngest of 11 kids, which I guess for
Holy
back then
cow.
is pretty average.
Yeah, but can you imagine?
Yeah,
First of
no, he
all,
was the youngest.
being the youngest of 11 kids has to be crazy. Because, like, I feel like you're probably a little bit
Pushed
neglected
to the side.
attention wise. Yeah.
I'm like, you have to think that the kids were probably helping take care of him.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Yeah.
the poor mom having 11 kids by that point, I'd be like, okay.
Crazy. Oh,
So, and they were Scottish immigrants. His parents were.
neat.
So he was, I guess, first generation American, which is cool. He showed a passion for writing from a young age, which obviously factored into his future. He began writing satirical essays and sketches to local papers. That's kind of like how he got his start. And he loved using pseudonyms. Two of his pseudonyms were Jonathan Oldstyle and Diedrich Knickerbocker. So I think that these names were, I could be wrong. I think the pseudonyms were like poking fun at certain things just because like Old Style and
Yeah.
Knickerbocker, like,
Knickerbocker. Yeah.
yeah. So and then he had his first major work published called A History of New York under that Knickerbocker pseudonym, and it was like a satirical take on New York's Dutch colonial period. So I don't know how, I mean, I guess for the times it was like funny, but like now we're just kind of like, okay.
Okay.
But he seems to have been very, very clever. So
For his
obviously,
time, for sure. He
he
was
wrote, yeah,
definitely a
he like writes
comedian.
all these like fantasy stories, but he's also really, really funny. Um,
Smith.
so then he also spent many years living in different European cities. And actually, when he was working and living in these cities, he wrote the sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon Gent. And I think gent just means gentleman. Um,
Hmm.
and this is like kind of like the anthology book that included Rip Van Winkle and Legends of Sleepy Hollow.
Oh,
So
neat.
he wrote his most famous pieces while he was in Europe, and it's funny because it's like he ended up living in Sleepy Hollow later, or obviously back then it wasn't called Sleepy Hollow, but it's interesting that when he wrote it, he wasn't even in Sleepy Hollow.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and so he really was one of the first people to introduce American folklore to the European audience. So he was, like I said, he was a diplomat. He worked at American embassies in, I guess, different areas of Europe because I didn't see any specific countries.
Yeah, he could have been multiple countries, just a
Yeah, or
general diplomat.
yeah, so that's pretty cool. And he also got a lot of inspiration for his writings from being a diplomat, which is cool. So he lived in Europe, he lived it up, he wrote his stories, he went diplomating, and then he returned to the United States in 1832, and he continued to write and publish works and kept on, being a successful author. he has, I mean, he has a bunch of notable works. I'll be honest, when I was looking through them, the only ones I knew were Rip Van Winkle and The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, but I'm not as, I guess, I don't know much about enough. I don't know as much about English literature as other people do, so other people might be banging their heads like, how do you not know about the life and voyages of Christopher Columbus? But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
he had a lot. So he wasn't a one-hit wonder, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Um, and like I said, he was looked at as one of the first American authors, if not the first American author to achieve international fame, which is really cool. And he passed away on November 28th, 1859, and he is now buried in the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery.
Neat.
Yes. So basically all that to say, Sleepy Hollow and Washington Irving are very are very intertwined with each other. And Washington lived in a home in Sleepy Hollow called Sunnyside. That's like what his grounds were called, Sunnyside, which I think is very cute.
You know what it reminds me of?
An egg.
Well, yes, first and foremost, definitely an egg. But also, wasn't the daycare in Toy Story 3 with like all this like the
With
psychotic
Lotso.
bear Lotso? Yeah.
Yes.
Wasn't that called Sunnyside?
Yes, Sunnyside. That's a good memory. That was a really good memory.
Thank you. I know
Yes.
nothing if not my Disney Pixar trivia.
Not Toy Story 3. So his was also called Sunnyside, and now it's a historic site and a museum, and it's open to the public. It's probably one of the most popular attractions in Sleepy Hollow for obvious reasons. So and also it's kind of cool because a lot of stuff there is like original furniture from when he lived there, which is like
Oh,
adds to the
neat.
authenticity.
I
Yeah.
love that. Yeah.
And he also died. This is also where he died. So this is where the haunted element comes in. People think that his ghost roams around the area, even though he's not buried on like Sunnyside property. They think that his soul still chills there.
I mean, I saw a picture of Sunnyside and it's not a bad place to live for all
Yeah,
opportunity.
it's
So,
not. It's so pretty. It has like a very whimsical style of architecture, right? Um,
yes.
and it's some people say it's a blend of Dutch, Scottish, and Spanish influences,
Ooh,
which
neat.
you can definitely see. It's
Yeah,
definitely European style. Um, it's really really pretty. I'm sure we'll put a picture on the Instagram, but
for sure.
yes. Um, and it's overlooking the Hudson River, so there's like a water view. It's got plenty of gardens, flower beds. There's like paths that are like winding. It's a really really pretty place. That honestly, I know they would never open it up probably as like a bed and breakfast, but it is like the type of place you
It
would want to
definitely looks
stay.
like it should be.
But I'm like, I understand. I believe it's on the historic landmark registry. So like I'm sure they can't do that, but it's super cool.
Not
And like
to, oh,
no, yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
Not to like relate this back to yet another piece of popular media,
Hmm.
but remember in You season 4 where Jonathan Moore like shows up to that house
Yes.
and it's where like Reese Montreux or something is staying. This house looks exactly like that house,
Oh yeah. Oh, like
doesn't it?
yes. Yes. At first I thought you meant like that giant mansion. Yes,
No,
it
the
does.
house that like Reese is staying at. I highly implore you guys to watch You, but uh
That's a
that's
really good
that's
show.
what that reminds me of.
Yeah, exactly. So it's funny because it's not like you might be picturing a mansion. Like it's a big house, but it's not a
But it's not,
mansion.
yeah, it's
It's
definitely not
really
a
pretty.
mansion, but it's gorgeous.
Yeah, it's awesome. And like I said, like there's a lot of furniture that belong to him. There's also a lot of like personal belongings of his that are like in the house. So they kind of tried to make it look like
Neat.
how it looked when he lived there, which is really cool.
I love it when historical places like stage how it would
Yes.
have looked back in the day.
You
Oh,
get the most accurate and I guess historically accurate view of how it looks, which is really cool.
yes. Oh, look at
And
this.
what were you
This
gonna
is
say?
his study. His study is like all set up
Yeah,
how it
with I know,
was.
isn't it
Really
so
neat.
cool? So yeah, it's really really cool. And like I said, it was designated a National Historic Landmark back in 1962. And now it's operated by the Historic Hudson Valley, and they're a nonprofit. And obviously they want to preserve historic sites in the Hudson Valley. Um, and anyone can come through and take guided tours of the house and the gardens. And it's really interesting to kind of have like the context of his life go, like if we do end up visiting here, which I would love to, like
I would
it's
love
super
to.
interesting to have the context of his life and his stories and know how intertwined he was with Sleepy Hollow. So it's really cool. The only, like I said, the only real haunt for this place is that allegedly Washington Irving's soul wanders around the area, but otherwise it's just a really pretty cool historic place.
I love it. I think it's like, even if it's not haunted, I feel like this is one of those places where his spirit, like definitely you can feel his spirit when you walk into this place. Does that make
Exactly.
sense?
Yes, I completely agree. Even looking at pictures, you're like, ooh, this guy was cool.
And it's like almost like haunted by his memory because it still feels like he's still there.
Yes. Yes, that was
Right.
beautiful.
Thank you. I'm just trying to connect it back.
Speaking of spirits and spookiness, what
So
do you have for us?
I'll move on to my first location,
Yes.
and that is the Headless Horseman Bridge in Sleepy Hollow. So our boy Washington Irving was a bit of a fan of the macabre, one might say,
Aren't
and
we
he
all?
took, yes, I would assume if you're listening to this podcast, you probably are. Um, and so he took a specific liking to a bridge that was located at the intersection of Broadway and Gordon Avenue in Sleepy Hollow. And it spans like a narrow section that's almost like a creek of the Pocantico River.
Cool name.
And like I said, this is probably a familiar location for fans of classic horror and fans of Washington Irving, because Irving's 1820 story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, features this bridge in the final showdown between the protagonist, Ichabod Crane, and the antagonist, the Headless Horseman. So, if you don't know the story of Sleepy Hollow, I would highly recommend going and watching the Disney animated version because it is just a fun, like, October watch. And also, it has, like, a banger of a song in it. Do you know what
Really?
I'm talking about?
So I was really, really scared of the Headless Horseman when I was
Yeah. Shocking.
I know, shocking. Add it to the list. um, so no, I don't know what the song is, but I'm assuming it's when they're in like the bar or like that like jolly area.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's, I think one of the characters that I'm going to talk about in a little bit is like singing it to Ichabod.
Okay.
But you know what I'll do? I'll post the Instagram post with that song. Like, you know how you can post it
Yes.
with a song now? Yeah, I'll do that because I don't want to play it on this show because I don't want to get copyrighted, but
Yeah.
it goes hard.
Okay. Oh, I'm so excited.
So so go watch the animated version, the Disney version. I think there's also like a theater adapted version. There's several movies
There's a
based
Johnny
on
Depp
it.
one.
Is it
Right?
really?
Yeah. Yeah. It's I'm sure it's what's his face? Tim Burton.
Oh yeah, you know what? You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
It is, yeah. So there's definitely a lot of adaptations, but if you don't want to go watch that, if you're scared of the Headless Horseman, I can sympathize. Sam can empathize. But basically, here's the summary of the story. So
All right, let's
it's
hear it.
set in and around, obviously, Sleepy Hollow and this Tarrytown area. And the main question that it seeks to answer is this particular town bewitched by the early settlers? Because residents seem to think so. Often people encounter apparitions and they enter strange trances. And so, because of that, a lot of the residents of the area are super, like, superstitious. So, our story follows, like I said, a man named Ichabod Crane, who's an extremely superstitious school teacher. And he also, like, kind of doubles as, like, a babysitter for the town. Like, like a
That's weird.
male nanny, like a manny.
A nanny.
Yeah, exactly. And he likes to listen to the women of the town's stories of the ghosts and especially the Headless Horseman, who is a specific spirit of a Hessian soldier that lost his head to an American cannonball in the war. So,
I don't know why that's funny.
yeah,
Like to a cannonball. Like
the
that was
cannonball, like,
a great shot.
I know the cannonball like blew his head off. So
Yeah.
that's bad day to be that guy. So one night Ichabod decides that he's going to attend a party at the Van Tussle family house. And he's vying for the hand of Katrina Van Tussle, who's this wealthy and beautiful like young lady, and he wants to marry her. But unfortunately for him, the town brute named Brom Bones is also vying for her hand. So Ichabod tries his luck and he ends up being rejected by Katrina and he leaves the party and he's just kind of like dejected. So he starts riding his horse, Gunpowder, home. And unbeknownst to him, he's pursued by a cloaked rider. So he starts to pick up on this after a while that this rider is following him. And he turns around and he's horrified to discover that the rider is headless and he sees his head resting on the saddle in front of him. So he begins to ride his horse at a breakneck speed towards the Old Dutch church and the Old Dutch burying ground, which is where the apparition of the Headless Horseman is said to like vanish or like go up in flames, and he can't pursue you any further past that point. So as he's making his final dash across this bridge, the Headless Horseman hurls his head at Ichabod and he strikes him, knocking him off his horse. And the next morning, Ichabod's horse and hat are found with the remains of a smashed pumpkin, but Ichabod is never found. And so it's kind of like an unclear fate. A lot of people say, like, okay, obviously it was the Headless Horseman. The Headless Horseman got him, scared him out of town, or killed him. Or there's also like a little aside from Washington Irving, who says like anytime the story was brought up, like Brom Bones seemed to like have a knowing look on his face. So they think it may have been Brom acting as the Headless Horseman, knowing that he was superstitious and had thrown a pumpkin at him instead of his head, or intimidated him out of town, never to be seen again.
Okay.
So you can still go visit the site of this bridge, although the original bridge that existed at the time of the novel rotted, and it was replaced by a more quote unquote modern bridge in 1912. So it's still quite an old bridge, and it's pretty cool looking.
Old.
Yeah, it's not super modern. Definitely worth a look if you're in the area. But people say that it's actually haunted by the Headless Horseman, and that's why they call it the Headless Horseman Bridge. Also as a tribute to the story, but
So I remember the part that freaked me out. Well, first of all, another weird thing that I'm still actually creeped out by. Old cartoons freak me out, like from like the early 1900s.
yeah, that's fair.
So I think that was also why I was scared of the Headless Horseman. Like even like Ichabod Crane, like the Disney one, like he kind of creeps me out.
Yeah, he's a little freaky
He's
looking.
like super lanky and like
Yeah.
he's just like creepy. But I remember like I guess in my head, and I guess like the tail like twisted in my head since I was a child, I thought that it was like the Headless Horseman, like he looks around, he like wants your head and like he wants to like chop off your head and like use your head as his new head.
I'm sure that's why he was supposedly chasing Ichabod.
I guess that's like implied. But that was like what freaked me out so bad. I was super scared of like beheading, like guillotine, like oh my god. Anyway. So it's kind of like it's funny because like it is like a kid's story, at least like the Disney version, it is like this like kid story, but it's kind of like gross and creepy.
Oh, totally. What's funny is that so I have two younger twin sisters and they are like polar opposites of each other. Like one of them is like a horror fanatic and one of them like won't watch horror movies like unless you're like, all right, come on, like let's sit down, we'll watch a horror movie.
Yeah.
She doesn't watch them of her own accord. But both of them went through like a raging obsession with that cartoon.
Really?
Yes. It was
When?
like
I like did not know this.
it was like not semi recently, but probably within the last like 6 or 7 years, I would say.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. I think they like watched it in class and they both were like hyper fixated on it.
Yeah.
I gotta ask them about it.
There's something about our family and like getting hyper fixated on these like weird weird things.
I'm
Because
gonna
I know one of
text.
them was hyper fixated on Coraline for a long time.
Oh yeah, and that's the one that doesn't like horror. So I was like,
Yeah. Which Coraline is creepy in its own right.
I
So
love Coraline personally. I think it's like a very
it's
creepy.
really good.
We should review that for the Patreon.
That would actually be, I would love to do that.
All right, I'm gonna text them and see what they have to say about the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and you start on your next
That's
location.
perfect. Yeah, we got to get a live reaction from them. All right, so while MK texts her sisters, I'm going to tell you about the Old Dutch Church, which is, of course, the main church of Sleepy Hollow. It's also called the Dutch Reformed Church, and it's a historical stone church. I just said church a lot, but it's a church. It obviously holds a very significant place in American literature because of the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, because the church was very it was a big part of the story. They referred to the church many times in the story. And it's also again on the National Register of Historic Places. It's interesting. I guess in like the Northeast and especially like the New England area, it seems that a lot of the places are on the Register of Historic Places, I guess, because there's more historic buildings since it was
Yeah,
like
it's just so old. Yeah.
Yeah. So the church, it dates back to the 17th century. So
Ooh, wow, that is old. Yeah.
and it's actually the second oldest existing church in New York State.
Ooh.
And it's the 15th oldest existing building in New York State.
Damn.
So yeah, it's really, really old. It was built obviously back when the place was known as Tarrytown. And it has a Flemish style roof. If you look at a picture of it, here, I'm gonna pull up a picture of it real quick.
I'll vamp for a second. So I did text my sisters and I said, weren't you guys obsessed with the Legend of Sleepy Hollow? Answer now and you can be on the podcast. And my one sister, the one who's obsessed with Coraline, just texted back, yes, 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 yes.
So she does.
So I said, LOL, what do you have to say about it? And I'm waiting on a response right now.
Okay, well that was actually a perfect vamp because now I've got a picture up. So if you look at a picture of it, I mean, it's definitely like a very classically New England old church, which probably doesn't give a lot of description, but it's made of stones. It's pretty small actually. And the inside is quite pretty. It's very white, stained glass windows, the whole 9 yards.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
Yeah, it's very, very pretty. And it actually, so during the American Revolution, there were people that went to the church that were from England or who were like loyalists. And they lost the patronage of these people because the lands were confiscated. Because actually, I'm sorry, can you cut that out? Because I don't really know what I'm saying, and
Sure.
That part doesn't even matter. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. So, like I said before, Washington Irving featured the church very prominently in the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. So it's like kind of forever connected to the Headless Horseman. In 1837, there was a fire that damaged the church, and it needed renovations and changes to the building. And then 60 years later, there was another renovation. Obviously, with something so old, like you're gonna have renovations if you want it to stay functional, which obviously it did. And then actually, they reversed some of the changes that were made after the fire to restore some of its original features. So it's almost like it got a facelift and then it decided it didn't like the facelift and it went back to how it was. Because I guess they wanted it to be more historically accurate.
Fair.
So kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And they also have a cemetery. Well, it's okay, so it's I guess I think it's technically a graveyard, right? Because isn't it a graveyard is connected to
Yes.
a church? So a lot of the sources said cemetery, but I was like, technically it's a graveyard.
We
So
did learn
anyway,
that.
yes. So the graveyard is known as the Old Dutch Church Burying Grounds, and it's got some significant individuals there. For
Ooh.
example, there is a former deacon of the church named Wolfert Acker, and he was actually the subject of Washington Irving's story, Wolfert's Roost. So that's kind of cool. There was like a representative from New York and also a mayor of New York City named William Paulding Jr. Just people like that. But then it's kind of interesting because there was a woman named uh, Katrina Ecker Van Tessel, who
Oh,
was the possible model for the character Katrina Van Tassel in The Legend of Sleepy Hollow.
that's so
Um,
neat.
so Mans was going around, I guess, just like full up, straight up using the names, but like slightly changing them. Um, and then there was also a friend of Washington Irving. Oh my gosh, I don't know what is wrong.
It's like a mental block.
Washington Irving. Okay, it's so weird. He had a friend named Samuel Youngs, and people think that he was the model for the character Ichabod Crane, which is super interesting.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, so they're both buried there. And then it seems like Washington Irving was also buried there, but then I also saw something that he was buried somewhere else, but I'm pretty sure, I don't want anyone to quote me on it, but I'm pretty sure he was buried here at the Old Dutch Church graveyard.
Oh, that would
So
make sense.
yeah, right. Um, yeah, so that's like really cool. And also the cemetery or the graveyard dates back to 1658. So it's witnessed so many different groups of people. Dutch settlers, Native Americans, um, African American enslaved people, servants, British soldiers, like it's seen so much, so it makes so much sense that it would definitely be haunted. And you know what, if not specifically haunted, it definitely has like an interesting vibe to it because it's like all these like gravestones from like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago, so it's really cool.
I don't think that you can have a graveyard without it being a little bit haunted.
Yeah.
That's just my personal belief.
I completely agree. And this is like one of those, not to be weird, but like I would actually like to visit this graveyard. I think
Oh,
it would
me
be
too.
cool.
I'd love to. Yeah.
So that's the Old Dutch graveyard. Old Dutch church
Ooh,
graveyard. Kind of spooky, kind of cool.
love
Do you
it.
have update from your sisters, perhaps?
I do. So she said that I said, "What do you have to say about it?" She said that the Disney movie has a fire soundtrack and the aesthetic totally sets the whole fall vibe. And the nostalgic vibe reminds me of Halloween when we were younger. So if you're looking for that old sort of like early 2000s Halloween vibe, go watch that movie because it's definitely
Ah,
gonna take you back. Like it takes me back too. And I remember um before I'm gonna go on this side tangent and then I'll get to my last little haunt. But does anyone remember that old Disney Halloween special? And I don't remember like what exactly it was, but we used to watch it on VHS like in school, and it was like it was like they're getting ready for like Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween party, and there's a scene where Goofy is making like a soup and he's singing a song about it, and he's like lizard skin and chicken gizzards or something.
okay.
Okay.
Yes.
If you
So
don't know what I'm talking about by now, then you're not going to understand it. But as
um,
part of that, it would always show like part of the
okay. It was
Legend
like
of Hollow.
Mickey's Twice Upon a Christmas vibes, but Halloween version.
Exactly. And you know what? I'm going to see if I can find a picture of it and I'm going to put it on the Instagram and people can tell me if they remember it because it's such a vivid memory of mine that I need to know if anyone else
Yeah,
remembers
because
this.
I'll be honest, I don't know if I remember. Like the chicken skin and chicken gizzard kind of like rang a bell,
Okay,
but I need
I'm gonna send it to you because
okay.
I can like hear the song in my head, but I'm not gonna sing it on this podcast because I feel like I would sound insane.
That's Patreon only.
Exactly, that's Patreon only content. So, so my last haunt is called the King House Mansion, and I cheated a little bit because it's not actually located within the borders of Sleepy Hollow, but it's located in Tarrytown. So
Okay, same thing. Potato, potato.
it's close enough. And the King House Mansion is actually located at the Tarrytown House Estate. So it's a home called the King Mansion, was built in 1840 by J.S. Cronise. I don't know how to say that last name. It's Cronise. In 1895, it was purchased by, quite a jump. It was purchased by William R. Harris, who was the founder of the American Tobacco Company. So, he had that cash.
Yeah, he got that tobacco money.
And he renovated the King Mansion by purchasing granite from local quarries and like building up the entire mansion with all this local granite. So it has that distinct like marble look that the estate is known for today.
Okay, cool.
The most notable owner among many was Thomas M. King, who is the vice president of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, who purchased the house around 1900. And for all of our board game fans out there, you may recognize the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad as the B&O Railroad that's featured in Monopoly.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I don't play Monopoly, but that's actually a very interesting little tidbit. I like it.
It's kind of neat, right?
Yes.
So, Thomas King's son, then Frederick King, kept the house in the family by marrying Harris's, who was the original owner, his daughter Sybil. Okay. And she was named the queen of both the Tarrytown House estate and the King Mansion. And she remained the queen of both estates until it was bought in 1921 by Mary Duke Biddle. And
a woman bought it.
Yes. She was one of America's richest women from the Duke tobacco family in North Carolina. And she renamed she renamed the Tarrytown House estate Linden Court.
Okay.
But Sybil and Frederick didn't move far. They just moved into King House, which was right next door. Okay. So now the two estates that were once originally one estate have been separated into now Linden Court, which was originally Tarrytown Estate, and King House.
Okay, interesting choice.
Unfortunately, Sybil died in 1955, and Biddle purchased King House and reunited the estate. She died pretty soon after. She died in 1960, and her children sold it to the nation of Mali. M-A-L-I. And they used it as a diplomatic retreat for the African nation in America.
Oh, interesting. Right? Oh, wow. Okay.
This place has a pretty rich history. It has lived many lives.
Okay. That's really cool.
Eventually, it was bought by a man named Robert Schwartz in 1964, who turned it into the nation's first conference center. So this was the first hotel type situation with lodging designed specifically for business conduct.
Okay. Wow. The first one.
Center. Yeah, it's pretty neat. Yeah. And he had worked for Time magazine, and this whole endeavor to create this conference center was supported both publicly and financially by AT&T and IBM.
And what year was this, did you say?
1964.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. It's so random, but I kind of like it.
And so since it's now being used for business and it's kind of I've said this a million times, but the first conference center, they have a lot of businessmen and great minds coming in and out. So it becomes sort of this intellectual hub, if you can call it that. So they had a lot of notable people stay there, including Andy Warhol,
Oh, very
who
cool.
is a famous artist. If you've ever seen like the Campbell's soup cans, that was
That
him.
was him. And like the Marilyn Monroe like pop art, was that also him?
Yes, I think
Okay, yeah.
so. Um,
Oh, very
Charlton Heston and Judith Crist, who are both big in like the movie industry. Um, and it became a school for entrepreneurs.
cool.
And that was like Robert Schwartz said that that was like one of his greatest achievements was creating this intellectual hub, and he was like kind of at the very head of it.
Okay.
But now it's been renovated and you can stay the night there. And it looks awesome. I mean, I'm talking like gorgeous rooms, tons of amenities. Biddle, so the second woman owner from the tobacco company,
Mm-hmm.
she was a huge sportswoman. So she upgraded the house with tons of like sports complexes. So there's an indoor tennis court. I don't know if it's still in use, but she imported pink clay from sand to, or from, no, pink clay from France to be used as like the material for the court,
Wow.
which is pretty neat.
This lady was pretty cool from
She's
just from the
awesome.
little I've heard about her. Yeah.
I didn't want to go too deep into her, but she was pretty cool. Um, and then she also put in a bowling alley, a golf tee, and her husband were both, they together were known as like a super fun couple, and they loved to entertain and host these like lavish parties at this house. And they would host like certain dignitaries from other companies because her husband was a US ambassador to both Belgium and Spain. So they had international guests, they had guests of like high prestige in America. It was just like a pretty cool place to.
Wow. And like you said, it was like the Mali, the African country, right?
Yeah, it was a
Like there were
diplomatic
also
visitor.
like that is it's everywhere. It's reaching multiple continents. That is crazy.
Isn't that neat?
Yes.
So people do say King House is one of the most famous haunted places to visit up and around the Hollow area. And there's only one ghost.
Okay.
It is said to be haunted by Sybil Harris, who is the Frederick's wife.
Right, the one that died in like 55 or whatever.
Yes, and the daughter of the original owner.
Okay.
They say apparitions are fairly common. Like they're reported pretty much on like a weekly basis.
Oh wow.
That she walks through the halls on the second floor and she tends to linger near room 293, which was where she was staying at the time of her death.
Okay. Oh.
So people report hearing the sound of pacing and not seeing anyone in the hallway, an apparition dressed in all white, disembodied sounds and shadows of someone living in the house, and tons of orbs. They say it's very hard to
Wow.
get a picture there without capturing an orb.
Interesting.
And everyone reports that she's not a threatening presence. She's just chilling in her house. And she
Okay.
took a lot of pride in her house. So she is making sure it stays, nice and neat and well kept.
Is she the one that was considered the queen of the house?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so I can see why. She wants to make sure that everyone, yeah, like you said, everything stays nice and clean and orderly,
Yeah.
even in
It's
her death.
it's kind of neat. She was like the queen of the King House estate. And
Yeah, it's got a nice ring to it, I
I
think.
know, right? I could definitely get used
So
to
it now,
that.
so now it's a hotel that you can stay at.
Yes. And they host weddings there. It's beautiful.
You don't say.
I do say.
That's awesome. Okay, obviously we're gonna have to take a little trip. This is a very cool little town, right?
Yes,
It's very, very cool.
100%. Yeah.
I would like to live here. I think that'd be awesome.
I also would. But I think that wraps up everything we had for Sleepy Hollow. Besides the fact, go visit. It's a pretty cool place. It's definitely got some macabre history and like
Yes.
and just like I guess actually probably macabre is not the best word, but it's got
Spooky.
like spooky history. It's a perfect place to visit during autumn and
Yes.
spooky season to get in the mood. And yeah, that's all we got.
That's all we got. Keep leaving us suggestions for places
Please.
to talk about next. Um, And thank you to
Oh,
everyone who's been doing that.
we just had another suggestion roll in, so maybe we'll have to cover that next
Next week.
episode. But if you don't hear from us in the middle of October, it's because we're getting our spook on down in Orlando.
Getting our spooktacular on. But if you do want to hear from us, you gotta subscribe to that Patreon, etc.
ASAP.
ASAP Rocky. Thank you everyone for listening.
And till next time, we're just two ghouls creeping it real.
That's all we got to say about that.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.